So for those that are here, I am just going to wait another moment to let everybody into the webinar before we begin. Why don't we give it just another few moments? Okay, I think we can get started. So first of all, welcome to another installment of webinars for busy lawyers, and we're very happy to have you here with us today. My name is Amy Levine. I am the Director of Programs and Volunteers here at LCL. I'm going to be your host for today's webinar, Staying Sober in the Legal Profession During the Holidays. Before I introduce our presenters, Dr. Shawn Healy and Barbara Bowe, I want to remind you of what Lawyers Concern for Lawyers offers. We provide a range of free and confidential services to support the legal community's well-being, which includes one-on-one consultations with licensed clinicians for mental health and substance misuse challenges, peer support groups, educational programs, and one-on-one consultations with our law practice advisor on law firm practice management and professionalism. And now I am truly honored to introduce our speakers. Dr. Shawn Healy, who has been with LCL for over 10 years, is the Director of Administrative Operations and a licensed clinical psychologist. In his clinical role, he provides individual clinical consultations and facilitates support groups. He regularly presents to law firms, bar associations, and other legal entities on mental health and substance use disorders, as well as on neurodivergence. He serves on the Massachusetts SJC Standing Advisory Committee on Professionalism, as well as Massachusetts Bar Association's Lawyer Wellbeing Committee. He is also the co-author of the book, The Full Weight of the Law: How Legal Professionals Can Recognize and Rebound from Depression. Also, Barbara Bowe is a licensed independent clinical social worker who has worked for LCL for over 25 years and also maintains her own private practice. Barbara provides individual consultations, regularly presents to outside legal organizations, and runs our professional conduct group. She is often called upon for character and fitness evaluations from the Board of Bar Examiners. She is also the liaison with the Deans of Massachusetts' 9 law schools. Just a housekeeping tip. Please use either the chat or the Q&A features for your questions at the end of the presentations. We would love to hear from you and answer as many questions as we can. And without further ado, here is Barb and Dr. Healy.
Thank you very much, Amy. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to have you all with us. We're going to have more of a free-flowing conversation about this topic. So Barb and I will go back and forth. But yes, please feel free to throw in questions, and we'll try to get to any and all of them as we go. So we want to start off first by sort of recognizing a contradiction, which since we're here talking about staying sober over the holidays, the contradiction is this. One, the holidays are often a different time. It's a unique time, right, with changes to our schedules or invitations or demands, right? It's unique in some ways, but at the same time, it's every day is like any other day, right? So that the challenges that we face today are the same challenges that we faced yesterday, the same challenges we'll face tomorrow. So it's helpful to keep both of those things in mind when we're thinking about a plan for sobriety over the holidays, because it definitely can be a more challenging time. But when it comes down to it, what works on every other day of the year is going to be helpful during those days over the holidays or more challenging days. So we will be referencing both of these ideas, that yes, it's unique, but also it's not unique. And so hopefully that's not confusing. Hopefully that is sort of rings true for your experience as well.
Let me just jump in for a minute, Shawn. I
Yeah.
think one thing, just in terms of what Shawn's saying, right, to underscore, highlight, pay attention to, is that to not get caught up in the intensity sometimes, or the anxiety or the rush in terms of the holidays, and that the ability to just remember what it was like in terms of early sobriety when you took things a day at a time really applies now. So it's a good reminder what he says in terms of underscoring the importance of, just for today kind of thinking.
And then just to acknowledge some of the things that do make the holidays different or present sort of challenges that are helpful to be aware of and plan for. Not all of these might ring true for you, but for some, there are more social engagements, right? More invitations, feeling more obligated to do things that you typically wouldn't do in your day-to-day schedules, whether that be family gatherings, friend gatherings, work gatherings. So that can feel different, where you're trying to manage uh, more invitations or obligations to sort of fit inside your busy schedule, right? Most of us, we don't sort of work day to day, reserving a bunch of time and energy for just in case I get invited to something. Most of us work day to day, trying to maximize our time and our energy. So our lives are pretty full with various things. And so at a time when more invitations are coming in, it can often feel overwhelming. It can feel stressful. Even if those things are positive, our stress can go up just as a result. Another thing is to, uh, based on your work schedule and your work demands, sometimes in order to take time off for holidays or fun stuff, that means doing more work in a shorter period of time, right? So like I have to prepare for taking a day off. So in order to prepare for that, I have to do more work ahead of time. Sometimes that means I have to do more work afterwards, particularly if you're a solo practitioner and you don't have sort of built-in time off or people to cover. Then oftentimes it feels like sort of like have to earn your time off ahead of time, and then you get punished for taking time off afterwards because you got to catch up. So that can be an added stressor. Another one is just the prevalence of alcohol, unhealthy food, changes to routine, and challenges to our boundaries during this time. And we'll break that down more as we go, but sort of being prepared for that mentally, emotionally, physically is helpful so that you're not surprised by uh, some of this additional exposure. It's also helpful to sort of keep an open mind about the holidays, that it could also bring genuine connection and joy. Lots of good stuff can be happening during this time. We usually speak about the holidays from our personal perspective or experience. And so if you, like me, typically find the season to be really stressful and less than enjoyable most of the time, then that can come through in terms of how you're thinking about it. So it's good to remind yourself that opportunities or times of the year like this bring both challenges and potential, uh, connection or positivity or things like that. So if we are open to both of those things, then we're more likely to be able to handle the negative, with a clear view, as well as be open to the good stuff. And then also sort of related to that, our history with the holidays are going to influence sort of what we expect and often how we experience them. So for example, if you have had positive experiences in the past with family, but you've had family loss. And so you might be grieving the loss of significant people in your life. Or if your experience has been more disappointing or stressful, then you might have that association with the holidays. No matter what it is, it's helpful to be aware of what your experiences are, what your expectations are, and sort of be prepared to address those expectations and that perspective. What do you think about the holidays, Barb?
I think that's really pretty much spot on in terms of the holidays evoke a lot of different things for a lot of people. And in terms of rituals, in terms of routines, in terms of anniversaries, or this time last year, or I remember when we were kids, we did X, Y, Z. And sometimes, in terms of what you were saying before, Shawn, too, I think sometimes that the holidays can be kind of a surprise. So sometimes you might go into them depending on what the activity is or the people involved with some dread, maybe. And you could be pleasantly surprised that sometimes people are able to bury the hatchet, make amends, sort of be able to put the train back on track. And that can be a really nice surprise based on the context of the season. So it's good to be able to be prepared in terms of trying to get yourself aligned with certain expectations about what's possible, but to not really get too rigid about it.
That's a great point. That reminded me of oftentimes I talk to people about the importance of having a very clear, achievable goal for like whether that's for a family get together or like a social event, instead of having a grandiose expectation that this holiday, this family holiday party is going to, be reminiscent of my childhood best memory. That's setting the bar unrealistically high. And so you're sort of setting yourself up for disappointment. But if you have something very clear and manageable and achievable, such as to have a good conversation with a family member who I haven't seen in a while,
Yeah.
or like to feel good about the decisions I make during this event, right? Something manageable and clear. You're often going to be, you're giving yourself the opportunity to leave that experience or that event with something that you've done well that you can take with you, that so you feel more control over how it goes as opposed to expecting the world and then being reminded that you cannot control the world.
I think one of the things in terms of, right, in terms of application of looking at taking charge of things that you are actually able to be in charge of and letting go of those things that you're not. Maybe one of the things to think about for yourselves is, I want to go through the holidays because this time of the year, from a recovery standpoint, right, we think about it as the trifecta: Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, right? And these can be really sort of challenging times, can be difficult times for some people. And maybe part of what you want to think about is, I want to navigate the holidays this year and get on the other side of the holidays without regret.
Good. That's a good goal. All right, so we're going to jump into like particular ways you can be preparing yourself for the potential challenges that this season often offers you or sort of throws on your plate. So one place to start is just by sort of practicing your awareness, right? Whether this is a mindfulness practice, whether this is sort of tapping into your emotional intelligence, which really is about tuning in to your experience. How are you feeling right now? Right? Can I recognize how I'm feeling? Can I describe it? Do I know what contributes to how I'm feeling? What makes me feel worse? What makes me feel better? Right? So increasing that awareness of your emotional experience, or just being more aware of sort of what you need in the moment, right? Again, going back to that idea of mindfulness, where if I know that I'm frustrated, if I know that I'm tired, if I know that there are particular triggers or situations that are going to give me more stress, right? The more that I'm aware of them, then I feel more prepared to approach them, to identify options in the moment, and then to make decisions that I'm going to be proud of later. So again, yeah, how are you feeling in the moment, and being able to sort of keep track of that as time goes on. What makes you feel uncomfortable, and also how do you respond to discomfort? All right. So for some of us, there's different types of discomfort or different situations that give us discomfort. And our response to that discomfort is going to differ based on what's making us uncomfortable. So is it like a social anxiety? Is it a social pressure? Is it, feeling I don't want to be judged or rejected, right? And then how do I deal with that discomfort? Do I have an avoidance? Do I approach in some way? Hopefully, Barbara and I will give you some tips to consider so that you feel like you have multiple options, not just like one particular way that you're going to respond in every situation. So having options is really helpful. That's one way that we feel empowered by feeling like I have options and I know how to exercise those options. It's one thing just to identify them. It's another thing to realize that, oh, I've practiced these. These are familiar to me, and I know that I can use them if the situation allows or if the situation changes. In addition to that, what triggers are potentially out there for relapse? Like, what is it that's going to make it harder for me to maintain sobriety, or what are those situations that I either want to avoid or I might want to have a ready-made plan for addressing even before I get there? Thoughts, Barb?
I, I think it's interesting, right? Because if you think about, it depends on circumstances, situations, and who the cast of characters are that you're going to be involved with, right? But I think if you know, based on personality and style, that there are certain people that bait the hook for you. There are certain people that really can be provocative, sort of pull you in, whether it's about political conversations, whether it's about sports, whether it's whatever. And you gotta sort of think about and be able to put yourself in that situation that where I'm going to see Uncle Johnny, or I'm going to see my cousin so-and-so, or I'm going to see my brother-in-law, whatever. And based on history, kind of how they operate. And so you wanna sort of be steadied, you want to be dialed in, and you want to be ready for that kind of interaction. And as Shawn was saying, kind of have a plan about, I'm not taking the bait today, or I'm going to really work on like restraint of tongue and pen when it comes to Uncle Louie. Again, because you don't want to leave the circumstance, situation, or the gathering with regret about would have, could have, should have done something different, right? So knowing kind of where you're going, who probably might be there, think about how you want to position yourself, how you want to organize yourself. Maybe talk to, your sponsor or another recovering person ahead of time to get a game plan in your head so that you can be in that situation and feel good about it.
Yeah, I think a couple of your points. One, Uncle Louie's the worst. I just got to put that out there. He's such a pain. But to Barbara's point, the last point there, it's really helpful to feel like you're not doing this alone, right?
Yeah.
You have support, you have people in your life to either to make a plan with or just have that support. But at any point where you feel like, oh, I'm doing this by myself, that should be the red flag to be like, whoa, like recalibrate, step back, take a pause, walk away, and then regroup, knowing that you're not doing it alone.
Right. And sort of like in terms of increasing your self-awareness, right? Let's say if you have to fly somewhere, or if you're a passenger somewhere, or you're taking a bus somewhere to get to to get to a party or some kind of engagement, right? Bring some literature that you can read, or have phone numbers at the ready that you could call people if you find yourself in a tough spot, where you could step outside, make a call, be able to just sort of pause, ask for help, sort of clear your thinking about what's going on, and not feel compelled to have to respond to every situation that or every fight that you're invited to.
That's a great point. So like related to that, so don't show up to every fight you're invited to or engage in that. It's helpful to have very clear goals, right, ahead of time, right? One way that we feel more in control is when we have a clear idea of what we want to have happen in a situation, as opposed to responding to whatever happens, right? When we respond in the moment, we are in an emotional state that will influence our decisions, as opposed to when we decide ahead of time how we want to respond outside of the moment. It's easier for us to prioritize, to be clear about our goals, right? And I will say there's a difference between feeling prepared for a situation, having confidence in your preparation, and then choosing what to do. And what I mean by that is there are some, I'll use myself as an example. My confidence, my ability to debate somebody on a political issue, I have high confidence in that. But whether or not I actually do that really depends on my goal. So if my goal is to maintain a healthy relationship with a family member, I might know that I could fare very well in a debate, but I might choose not to do that, because what my ultimate goal is that relationship. And so whether I'm feeling prepared for it or not gets superseded by, what's my goal? What's my priority here? And I want to feel good about it afterwards, not just good about myself, but good about the entire decision-making process and the goal.
It's funny that Shawn brings this up. So I used to have this brother-in-law who fancied himself as part psychiatrist and part lawyer. And so I would see him and he would always want to get into some kind of in-depth conversation, some kind of convoluted situation that he was dealing with. And he'd always want to sort of get my perspective on it. And then if I did give him my perspective on something, he'd say to me, "Oh, no, you don't know all the story." He never gave me all the facts of a situation. So then I got wise to that. And when I did see him, whether it was, family function or holiday weekend thing, whatever, and he would start the same sort of diatribe or question, I'd be like, "Oh, no, I don't talk about this stuff on the holiday. No, I don't go down this road on the weekends. No, I'm off the clock. I'm not having that conversation." And then he kind of caught on to that and he stopped doing that.
That's a great example of a very clear boundary.
Yeah.
And that'll be a point we make numerous times, but it's great to have a very clear idea of what your boundaries are, how to maintain them clearly, and practice doing that.
Right.
So that when the moment comes, you feel like, oh, I can do this because I've done it before.
Right. And as lawyers, right, sometimes, not always, right, but sometimes people always are looking for free legal advice.
Right.
And you should think about this on your holiday, on your time off, that it's totally fine to say, "You know what, call me on Monday."
Or call me next year, since
Right.
the new year's coming.
Or call me next year. Right.
Another tip is to schedule, the best you can, schedule social gatherings ahead of time so that you have a plan in place for them, right? Part of the opposite of that, I should say, is just responding to spontaneous invitations, right? We're like, "Oh, I haven't planned to, go to this party or attend this event, but I was just invited last minute," right? When we feel like I have a plan ahead of time, I can schedule it, I can protect my time, I can come up with a plan. That is one way to exercise more control.
And let's say this, right, in terms of what Shawn's saying, it's like if something were to come up that was kind of, spontaneous or something that you couldn't plan for, you weren't sure about it, it's really okay to take a hall pass. It's really okay to say, "Oh, you know what? I got something else going on," or "I'm committed during that time." It's really okay to let things go. You don't have to say yes to every invitation. And you really want to think about that for yourself in terms of where you're at, what your emotional sort of bank is in terms of what you feel you have to give or not, how tired you are, do I have to travel to get there? All kinds of things. It's okay to sort of, consider the options, but not feel compelled.
Absolutely. And then, so an earlier point, like not doing things alone, whenever you can, bring people with you, bring support with you, right? Bring allies with you. So whenever we feel like, oh, I've got a team, right? I've got my wingman with me, I've got my ally or my sponsor with me, whoever those people are. Like if I'm going to go into an unfamiliar situation, or if I'm going to accept that last minute invitation, if I feel like I'm bringing a team with me or my co-counsel, then it's easier to respond to situations. It's easier to lean on the support of somebody else.
And just to think about this too for yourselves, it's like, um, you don't really want to put yourself in a situation, especially in early recovery, right? You do not want to put yourself in a situation you cannot get out of, right? So if you need to be able to be on your own to get there, you need to drive there, take the train, the bus, the whatever. You want to be able to know that if the situation gets to a certain kind of point and you're uncomfortable, you have a way out. You don't have to wait for somebody to decide to leave with you, that you can, on your own steam, get out of a situation that feels uncomfortable for whatever reason, right? And sometimes think about this too. It's like, if you're going into a situation where you know you're going to be nervous or uncomfortable or whatever, sometimes people find that if they bring something with them like this, if you have a medallion from a meeting in terms of your recovery, right? You have like your 2-year medallion or your 5-year medallion or whatever it is, put it in your pocket, bring that with you, and be able to sort of think about it and hold on to it in a way to remind you about who you are, what you have going on, and what's important to you. Okay, so think about how you're going to take care of yourself in situations that you can't always predict how they're going to go.
That's a great point. Already mentioned this, but being deliberate about whether or not you choose to accept those spontaneous invitations. To Barb's point, it is okay to decline, to say no, right? Even if it disappoints somebody, right? When you decline an invitation, one, that's a good exercise of a boundary. The other thing is, if you're worried about people's opinion of you, if you say no to their invitation, just know that they're going to think you're so popular, you've got other invitations. So they won't think poorly of you. They'll be like, wow, they said no to my party. They must have a much better party to go to. So don't worry about that.
But listen, Shawn raises a good point on this. And I think this is a particular sensitive point for people in recovery. So, and especially early recovery, this sense of feeling badly about disappointing somebody. All right. And this is something that you're going to have to learn how to pull up your big boy or big girl pants and learn how to be with, because you can't please all the people all the time. In the past, that would get you into trouble, right? So in terms of this new path you're on, you have to really learn how to tolerate that somebody could be disappointed because, you refrain from the invite.
Mhm. And then I'm a big proponent of being a healthy control freak. So here are some ways of exercising some healthy control. One is you can actually, instead of being that passive recipient of an invitation, you can be the one to create the event, to host the event, right? And then you have control over the tone, the theme, the beverages, the food, right? You can exercise more control if you're the one doing it. If it's a work party, if it's a work obligation, and it's sort of like in the schedule of like this is what the firm does or the organization does, we will always have a holiday party, then think about volunteering to help plan it, right? To craft the theme, right? Either for yourself specifically or to be looking out for other people who might also be maintaining their sobriety, who want to make healthy choices, who have dietary restrictions, right? So being both inwardly focused but also outwardly focused to make that event happen in a way that's comfortable, not just for you, but for other people. When you're in a situation where you're not the one who planned it, you're not hosting, but you're a guest, right? There's often times where you're offered, food, drink, what have you, and you don't know what's in it. So get into the habit of asking for the ingredients. Lots of people do this for dietary reasons, for allergy reasons, right? There's a whole host of reasons why people need to know what it is that you're giving them. So if you're uncomfortable saying, oh, I don't want anything with alcohol in it, right? Then just ask for all the ingredients. And then you can come up with a response for why you might not want it. Like, oh, that doesn't match with my diet. Or, oh no, I'm saving my calories for later, right? If you're comfortable saying, oh no, that has alcohol in it, no thanks. Or just declining it with no reason whatsoever. That's another thing that you can do, right? Back to Barb's point about disappointing people. In these small decisions to disappoint someone, it's great practice. It's like, oh, I made this. Would you like to have some? What's in it? Oh, there's some rum, there's some sugar, blah, blah, blah. Oh, no, thanks. Oh, but I really made it. No, thanks. Right? So those little disappointments, that's great practice because you're going to disappoint people in life, and that's good because you should not make decisions based on how other people are going to feel about that. Another practical strategy is to bring food to the party and just eat what you brought, right? In the same way that if you had a very serious allergy, right, you would probably trust what you make because you know what you can eat, right? And if you brought that to a party, bring enough to share, but just eat what you brought so that you have confidence that you know what you're putting in your body. And also either bring drinks that you want or make your own. So if someone's there offering, here, I got you something, or let me grab you something, right? Just do it yourself so that you feel like you don't, that's one way to reduce the number of times you have to reject somebody's offer, by if you just take care of it yourself.
And this is the other thing too to think about, right? If you're in a social situation where you're not sort of sure about, like Shawn was saying, in terms of ingredients, or just the dynamic of the situation is not something that you're familiar with in terms of people or the place or whatever. If you, Shawn's comment about sort of make your own drink or be careful about your own drink is really a good one, right? So if you're going to a social situation, or say it's a bar event or it's a firm event or whatever, hold on to your cup. Hold on to your cup and be careful about making sure that you see what the drink mix is, right? And the other thing about it is, let's say that based on circumstances and situations and where you're at in your recovery, this year is not going to be the year that you're going to get together with family for whatever reason. Think about whether it would be just a great idea to have people that you know from your recovery come over and have like a friend's Thanksgiving or some kind of other holiday event, right? And you don't need to explain to people why you're not eating or drinking certain things, right? And I think if you're in early recovery and people who know you in a different capacity might be surprised if they see you're not drinking, you want to think about, oh, you know what? Yeah, I'm on antibiotics, I'm not drinking. Or you know what? I'm training for Boston. Yeah, I'm not drinking, right? Use whatever off-ramp makes sense based on who you are and circumstances. Don't feel compelled to have to disclose to anybody what you have going on if the situation does not feel right to you. That's your prerogative, right? Because at the end of the day, your first priority is to yourself.
Mhm. And to that last, to Barb's point there, like having a reason for saying no thanks, that can be really helpful, and you can have whatever reason you want. You can also just have no, like no is a complete sentence.
Right.
So you can practice just like saying no, no thanks, and like, oh, why not? And then not offer any explanation whatsoever, just say no thanks.
Yeah.
So it's also helpful to, particularly when you're anticipating some interactions or situations that are likely to occur, to Barb's point about, family member who always sort of tried to engage her in some contentious conversation. If there are things that you think are likely to come up, or they've come up in the past, it's helpful to practice some ready-made responses, right? And you should think about what feels comfortable to you, right? What sort of fits with your personality and how you handle things. Right. So for me, I often inject humor into things that I talk about and interactions that I have. So if someone, wanted to offer me something I didn't want, right? And I said, no, thanks. They're like, why not? I made it. I might inject humor to be like, you think I trust your cooking? Like, come on. Like, I wouldn't risk my life on your cooking, right? So if that's helpful, like have something prepared in the back of your mind for how you can address a situation that feels like I'm getting pressure. Another, yeah, sorry,
Let me just jump in on that too, though. And the other thing too, right, is that you probably are much more sensitive to how you're anticipating people are going to perceive you than actually is going to happen, right? So if somebody in some ways is kind of like questioning, oh, hey, how come you're not? Or gee, you really, I'm surprised to see that you're not drinking or whatever, right? You can use sort of whatever response you need to sort of put people off a little bit, and then just change the conversation, right? People won't stick with things if you throw in, oh, well, hey, what's going on with this? Or, did you see that movie? Blah, blah, blah. To switch things around and switch things up and get people kind of like distracted from the conversation at hand typically works really quite fine. So you should think about that too. Don't let somebody put you in a corner in a way that feels really uncomfortable. You don't need to allow for that to happen.
you should also feel comfortable, as Barbara already mentioned, like to do whatever is helpful, right? Whether that be, there are times when just being straightforward and be like, oh, no, thanks, I'm not drinking. Oh, you always drink. No, I'm not drinking. No, thanks. Right? You can be straightforward about it. You can also be vague, right? Whether that's the no, that's a full sentence, or sometimes you hear that, oh, you really got to address things head on as opposed to avoid them, as if avoidance is a bad thing. No, sometimes avoidance is a fine thing.
Yeah.
Right? So someone's trying to pressure you to drink, you're like, oh, I gotta pee. Where's the bathroom? Right? Because no one's going to insist that you stay around when you have to pee. It's just like this human thing where like, oh yeah, you don't interrupt somebody or make someone wait. If they have to use the bathroom, you let them go. So whatever feels comfortable, reasonable, the more options you have that feel like, oh, these are ready made, I'm ready to use them, the more prepared you'll be. And it's also helpful, as we've been mentioning already, is around the holidays, you're more likely to have contact with family members. If you have great relationships with your family, that's awesome. Good for you. If you have, conflictual or tumultuous relationships with certain family members, then this can be, a time where, whether it's post-election in like discussing politics, or just those relationships have baggage. It's helpful to be prepared, to deal with family friction that might pop up.
Yeah. And avoid conversations and sort of like we were saying before around this situation with my brother-in-law, right? Just to be able to say, you know what, I don't really want to get into that conversation this holiday. Let's let that go. Let's let that go. I'm not going to engage this time around. I don't want to talk about XYZ in terms of politics or this, that, or the other thing. It's fine. It's fine to be able to draw a line in the sand, and your job is just to hold it.
As we've already mentioned, whenever we're anticipating like additional stress, additional sort of pressure, it's great to be proactive in increasing our supports before we think we need them. Right. So whether that is, thinking about the number of meetings you go to, can you go to more? Right. Particularly to Barb's earlier point, like if you're traveling, if you're going someplace new, then you're outside of your typical routine. And there's a lot of support we get from our routine. So when we're outside of our routine, like be thinking about how can I structure things where it's not going to be exactly the same, comfortability with support, but how can I create some, structure of support when I'm outside of my routine in a new location, and maybe it's an old location going back to where you might have grown up, but how can I be cognizant and thoughtful of, making sure that that's in place before I get there. Know where meetings are available, right? Whether that's online, in person, and also to Barb's point, have phone numbers ready, right? Have your
Mm.
contacts in your phone ready for people that you can call for support, to talk, even as a distraction. If like you want to leave a situation, you're like, oh, my phone's ringing, and you
Right,
call a friend.
right, right. So know where the alkathons are if you're available for that. And like Shawn says, if you're traveling and you can look up to see if it's possible, right? In-person meetings in the location where you're traveling. That would be so great because you really get to see the meetings, although, personalities aside, the meetings are the same everywhere. And there's something that's really comforting and supportive and calming about being able to be in a room with people who are going through very similar things. If you can't pull that off, if you can't do that, you can always go to meetings online, or right, you can call your sponsor, call some of your pals in recovery, just to know that you're not out there on the skinny branches on your own.
Yeah, it's a helpful reminder
Mm,
if this is relevant to you. Sometimes it feels like I'm the only one going
mm.
through this, right? And that could be if you're going to a family event and you're the only one in recovery, right? So that it might feel like I'm the only one. But to Barb's point, like whenever you're in recovery meetings, when you're in that community, you realize like, oh yeah, everybody here is going through the same pressures of the holiday season or dealing with family and pressures. So it's a good reminder ahead of time to let yourself know that I'm not the only one going through this. There's lots of people who are going through this, and I can be a part of their support. They can be part of mine. And again, we already mentioned this, but again, if you're traveling, do your homework ahead of time, whether that is, how am I going to get to the place that I'm going? Do I have control over my transportation? Or do I have to rely on somebody else? What are alternatives that are available to me in terms of transportation and planning? Do I have, or will I have sort of the privacy that I want for where I'm staying, or do I need to adjust that? Right? Do I have the ability to go on walks so that I can call people if I need to? Do I have the ability to transport myself to meetings that are in person? Just sort of being cognizant ahead of time, even if the place that you're going is familiar to you, like this is where I grew up, um, still planning as if it's a brand new place, right? Like you're traveling to a new country. You want to make sure that everything's in place. You want to make sure that things are sort of spelled out ahead of time so that you're not having to problem solve in the moment.
And the other thing about this is something to sort of like consider. Is let's say that you make the investment and let's just say you go home or you go to a familiar situation, a gathering, whatever, and you go with the best of intentions, but you get to this meeting or you get to this family event or whatever, and you're like, you know what? This is more than I bargained for. This is more than I feel capable of taking on now. It's really important to give yourself a hall pass on this. It's really important to be able to know that leaving early does not mean failure. Okay, it's because I think it depends on where people are at in their recovery, what they have going on in their lives. But sometimes, what you think is going to be workable and sustainable might not be. And you got to be nimble and you got to be able to recognize, you know what, this is not a good place for me to be now. And that it's okay to cut the visit short, leave early, kind of adjust your schedule. It's fine. And it's just important to not beat yourself up over the fact that you might choose to do that based on circumstances, situations, and what's going on.
Absolutely. As you were saying that, Barb, I had the image of, sometimes when we get on a plane, we're just like, oh, I'm trusting that everything's going to work out just fine, right? And you can enjoy the flight, you can relax, you can sort of tune into whatever's available to you. And then there's also, those situations where, I'm not sure if it's going to go fine or not. So, there is the option of wearing a parachute on the plane where you
Mhm.
feel like, you know what, I'm prepared if it doesn't go well.
Mm.
I've got my chute, but knowing that I have my chute, I can try to enjoy this in this plane ride and and sort of hope for the best, but I don't need it to work out for the best because I've got my parachute.
Right.
So whatever that parachute is for you, feeling like you've got that available to you can help you feel more resilient and prepared.
Right, because the importance here, right, is that if you need to cut bait and you need to adjust your schedule or you need to leave early, the importance here is to be in a judgment-free zone about it. Because as we were saying in the very beginning here today, your first priority is to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you really want to take care of that and you want to defend that in terms of, hey, in terms of what you have going on. This is my little cat is trying to get in here on the conversation.
I thought Uncle Louie was
No,
trying
that's my little
to
cat causing trouble. So yeah, that's a good wrap up though, Shawn.
Thank you both for such a wonderful presentation, as always. I took notes and a couple of things, again, just re-emphasizing, be prepared, think ahead, plan ahead, have your goals, and use your supports. Again, setting the boundaries and practice doing that. And I like, again, Barbara, your expression of a hall pass. You know, don't accept an invitation if you don't want to. Leave if you need to. And again, take a bio break if you need to, and if that's going to help you step out of the situation, especially with Uncle Louie, I think, was that the name? Anyway, so I know that we do have a couple of questions, so I do want to get to those, make sure we do attend to those. What tools do you think are effective for battling internal and external pressures, expectations to celebrate with alcohol? And relatedly, intrusive thoughts and feelings of, I'd enjoy this more if I were drinking. I'm missing out. I'm not able to celebrate fully with my loved ones. These feelings always flare up for this person around celebrations and special occasions.
I would say it's helpful to be very specific about what it means to you to celebrate, right? Because sometimes we have this vague idea of like, oh, celebrating means to just go with the flow, or like it's to be happy or jovial or something like that. So the more specific you can be, like what does it mean to celebrate with my family, right? Does it mean like sharing a laugh? Does it mean like having a good conversation? Does it mean, asking somebody about what's going on in their life so they feel heard and seen? Like being very specific makes the ability to achieve that goal a lot more possible. Whereas if it's vague and like, well, the way that I used to do it was, well, I was drinking. Therefore, that was the only avenue I knew to get to celebration, as opposed to actually defining what that means to you, what celebration means to you, and then being able to identify multiple avenues to that goal, if that makes sense.
And depending on where people are at in terms of their recovery, there might be times where where drinking situations you don't belong in. And you might need to sort of take yourself out of that and not put yourself in a situation like that. That's a real individual decision. And that's based on where you're at in your recovery, what kind of ownership in a way you take in terms of your recovery, and how you understand the function that alcohol had in your life in the context of, was it a numbing agent? Was it a social lubricant? Was it something that allowed you to get outside of yourself in terms of your own discomfort, socially, anxiety-wise, whether it took the edge off of your depression or your worry or your fret? You need to really kind of understand those things so you know when the impulse to drink comes up, which is normal if you're alcoholic, what it really means, what it's about, what am I responding to? And not just sort of think of it as a blank check and, oh, I'm going to act on it, right? Because it's about impulse control. And it's about something that in terms of recovery, you need to be mindful of and you need to be working on.
Excellent. Thank you. We have a comment from somebody. This person found that people really don't care as much as you think they will by not drinking. Bartenders do not care that you order a soda and lime either. This person decided to be sober in July of this year, and this person had one awkward moment. Internally, it was terrifying, but the person who handed her a drink, this person a drink, who knew that they were a wine lover, was just, oh, I didn't know, but good for you. In the moment, this person felt uncomfortable, but afterwards was so proud of themselves that they now keep that feeling in mind when those moments come up.
Good.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to also just recognize that our discomfort is temporary. Right? All of our feelings are temporary. There's no constant feeling of anything. There's a fluctuation and a change. So if you're feeling uncomfortable in the moment, declining the invitation for a drink, that will change, right? And you don't need to do anything about it other than wait for time to pass, right? That discomfort will start to dissipate, or social anxiety, if you're feeling uncomfortable, and typically you used to, treat that with alcohol, but now without it, you're more aware of that anxiety. That too is temporary. And there's lots of things you can do about it. But one thing, a very simple thing you can do is just be aware of it and wait. And just notice as it starts to tick down, right? The more that we feel like, oh, you can almost gamify it. Or like, oh, I'm playing, having a competition with my anxiety, and I'm going to wait it out. I'm going to see like who can last longer.
But you know, the other thing too, just as a add-on to what Sean's saying, is that that sense in recovery sometimes for people that this feeling state will never end is really common, because people generally always drank and or used in response to it. So they don't really have a track record to know, oh, this will pass, right? So I think one thing I always encourage people to do is, like, if you have a thought about drinking or using, tell people about it. Because the harboring it, the holding on to it, is really oftentimes really difficult for people, and depending, can be really destructive on some level, right? So the ability to get it out, the ability to sort of like not let it become kind of like this toxic loop is important, right? So I would always, and the fact that this comment that you made, that you shared with us, Amy, is also about this woman's first time maybe having success in this way. And that's a huge deal. When people are able to get through the first anything and not drink and use, it's huge. So her ability to really acknowledge that and hold on to that is like very important.
Barb, earlier you also mentioned that people will use the alcohol as a social lubricant. And it is difficult, right? Sometimes walking into a big room of people, maybe it is a work event, people that you don't necessarily know, and walking up to somebody and starting a conversation, or that's a big challenge for people. So if you don't have that social lubricant, do you have any suggestions? How do you handle that?
So I think let me say a couple things, and then actually I need to scamper here, but sometimes it's just really helpful to say, I'm going to go to this bar event, and my goal is to last 20 minutes and to talk to one person, and then I'm out of there, right? So it's to not, to be able to carve out situations, circumstances that can work for you, instead of feeling like you have to get along to go along kind of thing. If you're really not in a place where it feels that you're safe enough, or your recovery is, you have a good enough grip on kind of where you're at and what's going on. So small goals, I think, are really helpful. I'm going to just show up. I'm going to talk to one or two people. And if I'm still uncomfortable after that, I'm out of there.
And one way to conceptualize that is, I'm going to practice, right? As opposed to expecting yourself to succeed at everything. If the mindset is, I'm going to practice, at this event. I'm going to practice this stuff. Then it's easier to sort of like, all right, I got some practice in, and then I can go. Right? I don't have to achieve something that's uncomfortable or unrealistic or like
Yeah,
what I think other people want me to do. I can
yeah,
just focus on practicing.
right.
You know, and I'll say I go to a lot of networking events. So it's, you know, just like a celebration, a celebratory event, it's still sometimes hard to meet
Yeah.
new people. I know, Barb, you have to go. But one of my lines that I actually use, I'll find somebody who's maybe not talking to somebody and say, I'm going to introduce myself to you because I know this is a very awkward thing. And I acknowledge the situation.
Yeah,
And so I said, so I'm going to say hi to you.
yeah,
And I acknowledge sometimes the awkwardness of just introducing yourself to somebody.
yeah.
And
And,
yeah, so
yeah.
I found that that actually works and I can get them talking.
And you know, I think it's important to think about this, right? I mean, clearly, you know, in the big scheme of things, there are some people who are way smoother in these situations than others are. They just are, right? But I think at baseline, really everybody gets tweaked in those situations. And if you can just allow for that and realize that you're not, you know, you're not unusual because you don't drink. You just happen to not drink, period. That's it, right? But if you realize that, you know, everybody at baseline is a little bit nervous about this stuff, then you don't give it the importance that you know, you might. And that's important, to not give all the power to the circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I gotta go, you guys. I'll see you later. Bye.
Well, thank you, Barb. I
Barb.
appreciate it.
All right,
We
bye.
appreciate it. So thank you, Shawn. We do have a few more moments, and if anybody has any additional questions, please feel free again to use the Q&A or the chat. Again, some of the things, it's really taking control and making your own decisions. So,
And to that point, one of the things I mentioned earlier was the importance of boundaries, and that's a very healthy way of exercising some control, and particularly at a time like the holidays, where like you're going to make decisions that you don't typically make day to day throughout the year. Like, oh, I don't typically go to this many events, or I don't typically, eat this type of food because it's like, it's a feast, it's a holiday, or it's a party. Whenever we have very clear boundaries and we're comfortable saying no, when we do make an exception to it, it really feels like an exception. Like, oh, I don't typically eat dessert, but it's a party, I'll have a little dessert, right? And when you feel like I'm making an exception intentionally, then that is helpful in maintaining your boundaries somewhere else. It's like, I'm not just throwing out my boundaries. I'm not just saying this is a time where like, oh, all my routines and my habits are out the door. No, I'm maintaining them. And then if I do choose to have an exception to a boundary, like accepting, a weeknight invitation, I don't usually do that. Or, again, like I don't usually eat gravy on things, but I'll try some gravy. So being intentional about those exceptions is another way of exercising control, as opposed to just feeling like I can't have any boundaries.
And I will say it's empowering. It really is. So I appreciate that point. So it doesn't look like we have any questions, additional questions. Somebody asked if they'll be able to get a recording of this program. Yes, it will be emailed to you directly after this program ends, as well as a feedback form. So hopefully you can fill that out. And it will also be posted on our digital library for future viewing. So thank you all. Thank you so much, Shawn. Thank you, Barb, even though you're not here, for such a great presentation. And hopefully this will be helpful for folks in the upcoming weeks and months with all of these celebrations and holiday parties. All right.
Thanks,
Thank
Amy.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.